Okay, so we are burning right through the phylogeny of plants. Talked about mosses, talked about ferns. Now we're getting into the seeded plants, which are the gymnosperms. Well, these are the cone-bearing seeded plants, but we'll get into more of that. So the oldest known gymnosperms were found more than 350 million years ago in the Devonian. Okay, and this is the first record really we have of seeds occurring in plants. Before that, they were all spores. And seeds allow for a significant advantage to the plants that have them, especially for life on land. So they provide a protective seed coat for ensuring that the seed can last longer and in more environments. It also supplies them with some food, okay, so it can have storage in there for the embryo as it develops. And with those two things, then, with a seed coat and storage of food, it can then lie in dormancy until favorable environmental conditions take place. So the first seed plants were fern-like in appearance, the Gymnosperms, seed ferns, and they were later reclassified as gymnosperms, not ferns. Okay, so our gymnosperms are generally seed-bearing. They have seeds in these cones for the most part. They can be very large, and we'll give some examples of some in a second. So gymnosperm refers to the exposure of the naked seed. Okay, so you can see the seeds on this cone are exposed to the air, although they're kind of encapsulated within it, as opposed to in fruit where they are surrounded by fruit of some sort in flowering plants. The seeds are produced on the surface of sporophylls, okay, or a similar structure instead of enclosed in fruit, and the seed-bearing and pollen-bearing sporophylls often are arranged in these cones. So pollen cones produce pollen grains, and then there are different types for the female ones. The female gametophyte is produced inside an ovule that contains what's called a nucellus. Okay, and we have a couple examples here. The nucellus is enclosed in an integument. Okay, so this allows some protection. And this later becomes the seed coat after fertilization. The female gametophyte is a lot smaller than the gametophyte in the ferns, and it develops within sporophyte structures. Okay, there are 4 living phyla of gymnosperms. We have the Pinophyta, which are mostly our pines, firs, spruce, and cedars. There's about 600 species of those. And they have distinct strobili or distinct cones and needle-like leaves. Pine needles, spruce needles, so on. Then we have Ginkgophyta. There's only one extant or living species within this phyla. They have notch broad fan-shaped leaves with evenly forked veins, and they have plum-like seeds enclosed in fleshy covering. We'll have a couple pictures of them. So the ginkgo biloba tree is the one living species. Then we have Cycadophyta. There's about 300 species of those, and they kind of look like ferns or palm trees. They have strobili in the center. Then we have Cnidophyta, which have vessels and tracheids in the xylem. So most other ones do not have both. There's about 70 species of those. So we're going to go through each of these phylum, starting with Pinophyta, and that one's going to be what we spend most of our time in. So the pines are the largest genus, and they are the dominant trees in the coniferous forests of the northern hemisphere. They include the oldest known living organisms and the largest living plants, the bristlecone pines and the giant sequoia. Their leaves are needle-like and arranged in these clusters of 2 to 5 leaves, which are called fascicles. So these are all fascicles of 2 leaves. And the fascicles are really short shoots, so short extensions of the stem. But they have restricted growth. They don't continue to grow. They stop at a certain length. They have modifications to allow them to live in many different types of conditions, including harsh conditions. So they have a hypodermis, which we talked about, which we've seen under the microscope. Okay, so basically an extra layer for their leaves. And they have 1 to 2 layers. 1 to 2 layers of thick walled cells is the hypodermis. They have a thick cuticle. They have recessed or sunken stomata. You can see those there here. You can see the cuticle. They have resin canals, and they have resin is important as an antiseptic and aromatic. So that's what provides the smell, the pine fresh smell. It prevents the development of fungi and organisms that are going to harm them, and also keeps insects away. They also have associations with mycorrhizal fungi, as you can see here, which are going to extend the roots and the ability to capture water and nutrients within the soil. Pines have wood that consists entirely of tracheids, so no vessels. Okay, and a conifer wood thus is referred to as a softwood because it does not have those vessels with thick walls, and the wood is softer than a hardwood, which would be like in a dicot wood, a flowering plant, a flowering tree, because they have thick walled vessels and fibers present. There are 2 kinds of spores produced in pines. The pollen cones, which are the male strobili, consist of papery membranous scales, and their microsporangia are in pairs toward the base. Meiosis then occurs in the microspores that develop into pollen grains. Here's some pollen grains here, which consist of 4 cells, and a pair of them act as increasing the ability of them to kind of float through the air. So they have a pair of sacs just filled with air to allow them to kind of float like a balloon, be picked up by the wind. The megaspores in the megasporangia are within ovules, and they have a pair of ovules at the base of the seed in cone scales. So seed cones are larger than pollid cones. These are the female types. And they have woody scales with inconspicuous bracts between them. Okay, so this is a female female cone. Okay, within the ovule contains a megasporangium containing a nucellus and a single megasporocyte. The megasporangium is surrounded by integument, and the integument has a pore at the end called the micropyle. So the megasporocyte then goes through meiosis, producing 4 megaspores, but only one of them develops into a gametophyte here, with the archegonia at the micropyle end. Oops, said all that, but didn't show it to you. The seed cones take 2 years to mature. So in the first year, the pollen grains catch on the sticky drops oozing out of the micropyle. Okay, so the micropyle is there to catch the pollen, basically. The pollen grain produces a pollen tube, and it grows through the nucellus, and 2 sperms come into the pollen tube. And the mature male gametophyte germinates pollen grains within the pollen tube into sperm. And the sperm do not have flagella, so they can't really move, and there's no antheridium. The megaspore then develops. The second year, the female gametophyte and archegonium mature. The pollen tube arrives at the archegonium, and then only one sperm survives and unites with the egg. The other one generates. The embryo is then nourished by the female gametophyte, and the integument then becomes the seed coat. Alright, so this is the life cycle then of the pines. And we'll go over this in class, but here you see the microspores, which go through meiosis, and there's 4 of them here, but only one of them develops into the gametophyte. And then you have the pollen grains formed, which are released. There are 2 sperm within that, and it sticks to the micropyle. Those sperm then go in and fertilize and create a diploid zygote, which then develops into the embryo of a seed develops some wings, it disperses, and then germinates and goes through mitosis and becomes a big tree, which then creates two types of cones, ones with pollen producing structures, microsporangium, and the other ones with the megaspores, which then go through meiosis to produce microspores, so on and so forth. All right, some other conifers which have some slight differences. The yew is from the genus Taxus, and the California nutmeg from the genus Torreya produce ovules singly at the tips of shoots, and each ovule is at least partially surrounded by this fleshy cup called an aril. In the southern hemisphere, you have a conifer called Podocarpus, which has these seeds which have a large appendage at the base, and junipers are another gymnosperm which have fleshy seeds. Okay, so the phylum Ginkgophyta, remember that's our ginkgo biloba. There's only one living species, only exists in cultivation, and it has a notched, broad, fan-shaped leaves. Their leaves are on short, slow-growing spurs. There's no midrib or prominent veins, so it kind of just fans out from one area. And they have hair-like veins which branch dichotomously, and they are deciduous, so they let them go every year. So there's a big ginkgo tree right there. So here are the fan-shaped leaves and the seeds, and here's the male strobili. They are dioecious, so yeah, they have male and female trees, and all the trees that you see of these are generally, I think they're male trees, right? So they'll produce pollen, but because there's no female trees that are planted, we don't have to worry about them producing. Eventually they'll die and go away. The seeds are enclosed in this fleshy coat with a stinky odor. Alright, Cycadophyta is the next one, the Cycads. They are slow-growing plants of the tropics and subtropics. They have tall, unbranched trunks, the crown of largely pinnately divided leaves. So let's see this next picture. Here you go. They kind of look like ferns. Their life cycle is very similar to conifers. Their pollination is sometimes by beetles, which will go from one to the other. And they have dioecious. So here's a male one and a female one. This one's producing pollen. The beetle will come and climb on this, and will go and climb on that and fertilize it. All right, the needlephytes. These are interesting. They have vessels in the xylem, so they're unique in that respect. The other ones do not. They just have tracheids. They have joint furs, which are of the genus Ephedra. You may have heard of this. This is what makes Mormon tea. So the saints, as they went across the Mormon trail, would gather this and make it into tea. And I have tried it, and it is gross. So this is the plant, makes this green stalks on it, and here's the male strobili, here's the female strobilus. All right, there's another genus, the Needham. It has vine-like plants with broad leaves, so here they are. And then this African species, Welwitschia, is kind of cool. It is very drought tolerant. It has a very short stem and a long taproot, and it has only 2 leaves which split. Okay, so this is actually just one leaf on this side, one leaf on that side, and then it splits. And they are also dioecious, so they have male and female strobili. Gymnosperms are very important to you and me because a lot of things are made out of them. The inner bark and needles of white pines are edible, and there's also pine nuts, which are edible. They're used for masts and sailing, crates, boxes, matchsticks, furniture, lots of things. Fuel, pulpwood, lumber, Christmas trees, pharmaceuticals. All that is produced by our gymnosperms. All right, finally, ginkgo, the seeds are used for food. So after the seed coat is removed, some here. That's not ginkgo, I don't know what that is. And also we talked about ephedra. So extracts from ginkgo seem to increase blood circulation, so it's found in a lot of health drinks. Mormon tea, ephedra, and there's a drug made from this called ephedrine, which is important for respiratory problems. And this is from a Chinese species. All right, that's it for Gymnosperms.